With Tony Mobley. Today is the first conversation with Tony Mobley to be simulcast on both YouTube and LinkedIn Live. So we welcome all of those who are watching on streaming media. We'd also like to welcome our radio listeners from Cincinnati, Ohio, Z98. And you can hear us on radio by going to z98fm.com. Today, I am having a conversation with Mr. Eric Nathan. Mr. Eric Nathan is a husband and father of Nicole, and he is married to Nicole, and he is the father of 3 amazing kids, Genevieve, Henry, and Philip. He lives and works in Washington State as an accountant director for Ziply Fiber supporting strategic accounts. But there is much more, and you will hear that on Conversations with Tony Mobley today. Thank you, sir, for being here with me today. We really appreciate you being here. And this is going to be a great conversation. I already know that. This is episode 67 of Conversations with Tony Mobley. Thanks to everyone for being a part of the journey. Watch live on YouTube and also on my website, conversationwithtonymobley.com. Conversation with Tony Mobley is produced by valued audio visual professionals who meet daily and are part of the Office Hours Global Community hosted by Alex Lindsay. Again, we want to welcome our listeners on YouTube and on LinkedIn Live, as well as those who are listening on Cincinnati, Ohio through Z98. Conversations with Tony Mobley is conversations with real people. Why are we here? We're here because life has provided me the opportunity to have real conversations with real people. Last week, we had a great conversation with Mr. Richard Lavery. I want to thank the team again behind Conversations with Tony Mobley for all of their hard work. But community, I need your help. Register at conversationwithtonymobley.com so that you can participate in the interactive chat Mukana, courtesy of Alex Lindsay and 090. For the Mukana chat, which is a chat which will allow you to put in your questions, and those questions can be voted up and down. Any questions that you have, please put in the chat. If you like this and past Conversations. We ask that you like and subscribe, set that bell to all notifications, and be reminded of upcoming conversations. And now that we are done with all of that, now we're going to get into the questions and talk with our friend, Mr. Eric Nathan. Welcome, Eric. And we're going to start with the very first question. Who is Eric Nathan?
Wow. Well, thank you, Tony. I very much appreciate you having me on. And you're going to start with the hardest question. I was telling you earlier, I think this is one of those questions that, you ask and then people sit and they think, what does that even mean? Like, how do I stand outside myself and define myself? I guess the only thing I can think of is the things that are important in my life. First of all, God. Secondly, my family. And then thirdly, the way I provide for my family. But, I would say, the things that I do in my life are structured in that order. And my family is very important to me. I think that is kind of the essence of who I am. Hopefully that comes out in the things I do and the character that I am trying to build. And I'd say that's who I am.
Well, I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so glad you were able to share who you are with us tonight. The next question is, what lessons have you learned from your parents that you're currently using today?
Another tough question. There's a lot of little things, but the biggest thing that I get from my parents, and they're still alive and they live near us. The biggest thing is to love family. I had a very small family growing up. So I am an only child and I had parents. But everyone that I would meet as we went through our lives that had an impact on me became uncles and aunts and grandparents. And my parents taught me that family is who you make your family. And that was true when I married my wife. I inherited a family of, I don't know, 100,000. Like, her family is really old. Has been in the country since the 1600s. They lived
Oh,
outside of
wow.
Jamestown. Yeah, right. So I'm like, oh man, what a big difference. My family, we figured out they came across around the turn of the 1900s. But family is important, and it's the core of who I am and what interests me, or what creates the interest I have about the world.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course.
What does your family think about all of the things that you're doing now?
Well, my kids are like, why aren't you playing Minecraft when you're at home all the time? Minecraft, they're totally into it. I would say it's hard to understand when you're online or you're looking at a computer screen all day. It's hard for kids to understand. It's hard to explain to people that you're actually focused and working on something that is bringing in income. I mean, it matters. It pays our bills. My wife, she does a much harder job than I. She stays home and teaches my kids. And she is a housewife who by far it's not a job that I could probably do. She does it far better than anyone I know. And but I would say that it's really it's difficult for people to really understand what that means. Now, I will say I've worked remotely for many years, and so that part of my life isn't that different. But what's different now are the things I've learned in office hours: the camera, the lighting, the video switching, the production piece that you know is a little intimidating, I would say. very intimidating to people outside of the community. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
fact that I'm on after hours, at night, which by the way, I would highly suggest people if they get an opportunity to go to, office hours global and then sign up for after hours. There's a bunch of really cool people that will help you develop your skills and your presentation ability. So that's my little pitch for it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. Let's talk about your involvement in the foster care system, officially or otherwise.
It's funny. You and I talked about that a little bit. We didn't want to spoil the story, but foster care, it's a difficult world in the U.S. I think we have many friends who have been foster care parents. We've had the privilege of being a foster care parent one time to one little girl. Absolute wonderful child. But when we got her, she was six. Let's see, she was 6 months old. I think she was 8 months old. She wasn't sitting up. She wasn't walking. She wasn't really responding. And we knew the
Mm,
mother. We knew the mother. But the state was saying, "No, we're gonna take her." And we were the place that she landed. She said, "Well, at least know them. Can you give them to the Nathans and give her daughter to the Nathans?" And so they said, "All right, fine." And I have three little kids. My oldest is now 10, and then I have a 7-year old and a 3-year, or excuse me, a 5-year old. He's going to kill me. Philip is 5 now. But they're so intense and they're so hands on and they're so full of life that you can't help but respond to them. And that's what happened. This little girl, this wonderful little girl, we now call Maddie. She changed her name when she got adopted, but she's a wonderful little girl. And seeing her grow up in a great house has been tremendous. But she was such a part of our life for a year. It was heart wrenching when she left. Heart wrenching.
yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we were losing a piece of ourselves, right? The other opportunity we had was a young girl who it wasn't in the foster system. It was a woman that kind of out of the blue came to us and said, "I heard you did this before. Can you take my daughter? Because I
Mm,
can't take care of her." It was a similar idea where she was disconnected and the child was really, oh man, she had a lot of trouble. She was a preemie, but she was 8 months old and had lung trouble, and she was having it was a difficult situation, but we didn't know what else to do. There was no state involvement, right? It was she came to us and said, "Can you help me?" And we went, "Okay, what's one more, I guess, in a family of three or five, I guess, if you include my wife and myself." And but again, it was my kids and our hands on, just kind of wrap our arms around her and love her as best we can. Her name is Bella, and she's a part of our family now too. Now thank God, we were able to reunite her with her mother about a year later. It was also heart wrenching, but in a different way. Like it was a part of us, and she will always be a part of our lives. She's a part of our family, but she's with her mother, and she's with her sister, and that really matters. And she's with her father, and it's a great situation. It's turned into a good situation. And it wasn't foster care in the traditional sense, right? Where you get money. And in fact, if anything, it was like money outgoing, right? That wasn't the point, right? It was just she needed help and we had to help her. And she became, like all the kids that we've interacted with, she became part of the family. So there's that family reference again.
yeah, you're going down a path, and it's clear that you see this as a ministry. So we're going to talk about that a little bit further down the line. We have a question from Roscoe Jones of Berea, California. Being involved in homeschooling, where do you stand on technology such as Zoom replacing the traditional classroom?
Mm. I was told not to say this, but I'm going to say it. That is a good question. I actually have an answer for it. I'm not just stalling, but I will say homeschooling is a very, well, it's a 24/7 job. I told you my wife does the job that that I wouldn't do, right? She's the stay-at-home mother who absolutely is outstanding. But homeschooling is, your kids are constantly learning over and over and over, right? Everything, they walk through life going, what is that? What is this? Why does this happen? What things that you don't stop to think of when you're an adult. Why is the sky blue, right? Like easy questions like that. You're like, well, should I tell them? So the question around whether or not we should, how do you use Zoom? People, you have to interact with people, right? I think there has to be a physical interaction with people that has to occur. But I think the technologies that exist nowadays open up avenues of engagement that you can't do, or what I used to do in school, watching a video, right? You'd watch a video of a museum that you couldn't visit, or you'd watch a video of a place you couldn't go. Now you can go there in a certain way, right? You can be with that person. You can interact with somebody from Africa or from India or from Asia, right? Although India's in Asia, but you can involve yourself in people's lives that are in a whole nother place. And that's a cultural development you cannot get just by walking out your door or going to the local school. And I want that for my kids. I grew up around international students. My parents had a ministry to international students who came to the US and studied in our universities. And so I was around students from Indonesia and Africa and, in places that I had never, Azerbaijan, places I'd never heard of, right? And you get that one-on-one, that personal connection. So I think you need both. And if you can figure out a way to create interactions for both, right? Where you have that physical hands-on interaction, that human interaction that we all need, and the online activities where you're engaging with people in a way you could never engage otherwise. That's where I think the technology really is. It's a lever that you can use for significant benefit.
Yeah, I think it's just amazing that we are having this conversation through YouTube, LinkedIn Live, and Conversation with Tony Mobley website. And you're also streaming to your personal LinkedIn Live account as well. But the fact of the matter is that you're in Washington State and I'm in Georgia, and we are having a real-time conversation. So this is an amazing journey and path that we are on right now. So
yeah,
again, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story.
It's so much fun.
So let's get into your faith walk. Let's talk about your faith walk.
That is an ongoing story. So I was born into a Christian family, albeit they had recently become Christians. So, but I didn't know, right? The world that my parents described that they lived in was a completely different world than I grew up in the sense of who the family was. My dad's family was essentially a bunch of just broken pieces. His dad spent time in jail. His dad was this activist organizer. They were atheists. His mom committed suicide. Really awful things. He had several half brothers, one who was committed to a mental institution at a very young age. But my family was stable and solid. And so I got that example. And in a way, I think that is somewhat harder when you have, you grow up and you're like, I'm a Christian, right? Because we go to church all the time and we do the things. And I started in the Episcopal Church. That's where we went to church for a good chunk of my life. And, you go through all the steps and you take communion. But faith is much more than a series of steps. It's understanding that the God of the universe who created you actually cares about you. And that's mind-blowing. And so if you stop to think about what that will do, what that actually means, it should be life transforming. And so over time, as I've gotten older, my faith has turned from, yeah, I'm a Christian, like I'm around, and I know all the Christian stuff and I know the Bible's passages, and, ask me anything about the Bible, I could probably tell you, to I understand what it means, and I've experienced debts and I've experienced highs, and that meaningful impact informs my life. I'm sorry, I'm getting some latency here. I apologize.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah. I I participate with a congregation that is located in Macon, Georgia, and since the beginning of the pandemic, they have been doing a Zoom meeting worship experience, and it's every Sunday and every Thursday evening. Um, and it's an amazing journey that we were able to do the things that we're doing in terms of we celebrate this month the 40th anniversary of the church existence, and the pastor is 93 years old and is still and preached last Sunday. And it's an amazing journey to be able to wrestle with what it means to be a person of faith and to continue to push toward what that means. And we're not gonna turn this into a worship experience, but I could easily do that. But I will say that the fact that you were able to do all of the things that you have done in the past with foster care, officially and unofficially, speaks to your dealing with making your faith or practice of religion something that is real and something that is tangible and something that pushes what it means to have faith. And so I thank you as part of a lesson that we have had in the past, where it was all about we had a lot of military people on our service, and it was about them sharing their experiences. And at the end of it, we would say, thank you for your service. And so I'm going to say to you, thank you for your service. Appreciate you.
That's meaningful.
Roscoe Jones is, you're very welcome. Roscoe Jones is back again. If a year with a foster child has a heart-wrenching ending for an adult, how have your kids been affected by those relationships?
My children are flexible. I think children in general are actually more flexible than adults. They're more bendy, right, physically, and I think they're mentally more flexible at times. That doesn't mean you can abuse it, but it does mean that they bounce back from those kinds of relationships. They were also young enough that I think their experience, it kind of washed over them in a certain way. Like they knew that this sibling or this young girl, these young girls that were a part of our lives, were a part of our lives, and they still know them to this day. But as far as that feeling of them, of those kids being our family, I don't think they had that same feeling, or if they did, it didn't really affect them in the same way. So I would say it's harder on adults, or at least it was harder on the two of us, my wife and I, than I think it was on them directly. Now, maybe indirectly over the long term, they might exhibit some, feelings that they didn't before. But as of right now, I think they understood what was necessary. And we tried to be open and honest with them.
Thank you so much for that answer. Thank you, Roscoe, for your question.
Good questions,
Ike Potter. of Handover, Germany. What do you think about food security and do you cook yourself sometimes for your family?
I do. Um, I'll start out by saying I only realized that my family couldn't cook when I left my family and realized and actually met my wife. I met my wife almost immediately after I moved out of the house. And we've been married, by the way, for 22 years. But her family can cook. So, yeah, I could cook breakfast typically. I'll do some, barbecue or a little bit this here and there. But I would say security comes from understanding what's important. Now, I understand the word food security. So I work with a nonprofit. I helped found a nonprofit that works to feed families. We take fresh food and we move it from the places that don't need it anymore, like Walmart. They have extra food. They donate it. It has to get moved out immediately. So I understand the term food insecurity. But I will say this: when I was first married, we ate beans and rice because that's what we could afford, and we were secure. It wasn't great, but we could eat beans and rice, and we were happy. And I think that's important. Now, in a case where you don't have any of that and you have to, go and figure it out for yourself, I think we have an obligation to help people who are less fortunate or in need, and I think it's critical for us to go do that. But I would say, in my time, I think that the things people need often aren't they can't eat beans and rice. There's usually something more that goes beyond that. It's the reasons why they can't, or they don't feel like they can go out and they don't feel secure in their lives. That's a much harder task because I can fill a belly, but fill a life, that's a much harder thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about, wow, you're so blessed. I made an arrangement with my wife 32 years ago that I would do all the cooking.
Oh,
And and sh- and 32 years later, she has not let me out of it. So I continue to do all of the cooking. So
I just was honest with my wife. I said, "Look, I grew up in a family that couldn't cook. I can't really cook. If you teach me how, I'll do some things. I do breakfast. Breakfasts are my thing. But her dad and her brothers, her older brother, when he does barbecue, it's like 18 trash cans of coals. And when I say trash, anybody who does any sort of smoking, you're like the trash can is actually the place you want to smoke something, right? It works really well. And he'll have every kind of thing you can imagine. I can't even compete with that. You can't like. And my wife is like she's like I tell her she's the soup savant. She can make anything a soup, and it's unbelievable. So I,
that's
I'm
fantastic.
blessed.
Yeah, I would encourage anyone who is on the verge of getting married to negotiate that that you be partners in the cooking thing.
No doubt. Well, not only that, but maybe you can learn from each other, right? As you kind of grow, everybody gets a little better. Everybody likes doing something, baking and cooking, and
Yeah, I was fortunate in that my mother-in-law was a fantastic cook when she was still alive, and she made the burden extremely enjoyable while she was still here.
see, family. That's the key. You can't do it
Absolutely.
on your own, no doubt.
Yep. And Roscoe is back again with another question. How does a deep relationship with God inform the way you approach non-believers? Why do you spend time interacting with others who may not share your views?
Mm. Well, Jesus did. Actually, that was the whole reason he came. I think if it was good enough for the God of the universe to come down and talk to people who didn't actually believe in him, it's probably worth our time too. I think foster care, I didn't say this earlier, but I think foster care is a requirement. Not foster care in and of itself, but taking care of the widows and orphans is a requirement of what I believe. It's not a choice. Like, you have to. You have to make sure that people who are less fortunate, that you have an ability to impact, are taken care of. So, like, when my wife comes home with a baby and goes, we should watch her, like, we should take care of her, what is there to do? One thing I'll tell you that we didn't talk about earlier, but I want to share a little briefly. My wife and I always wanted to have a lot of kids. And I know that's kind of unique in modern ideas. But when we first got married, we were like, 6 kids? Yeah, that sounds good. Like, big family. Because her family is decent. She had 3 kids, 2 brothers, and so 3 children total. But she was always around cousins, lots of cousins. And we wanted to have a lot of kids, but we couldn't. Not for 12 years. And it was heart-rending. Like, absolutely broke. And there would be times, like, we ended up moving back east, and there would be times where you'd see, springtime especially, it would be like stroller city everywhere, strollers, babies, new babies everywhere constantly. Babies. And my wife was just completely broken up about it. Like, that's what she wanted in her life, was to be a mother. And we finally went through the process of IVF, which we went to a doctor. We actually went to multiple doctors, and none of them got it right. They all kind of got a piece. But the final doctor we went to, they explained that IVF is this mixture of art and science, and that you kind of have to you're guessing, right, at what makes the right thing, makes the right cocktail to make it work. Well, we got Genevieve. She came from IVF, and we thought, well, that's probably it. I don't know. It's very expensive to do IVF. We couldn't do anything more. So what do? We moved back home to Bellingham. So we were living on the East Coast. We moved back home to Bellingham. And about 3 years later, Henry was born. And we were like, that's not supposed to happen. And we figured out why. We figured out that's where the doctors actually didn't know. There was a missing link that every doctor had missed, right? There was like, everybody got a piece of it, but they didn't get the whole picture. And we figured out what the issue was. And then 2 years after that, we got Philip. And so, God gave us that family. And I would say, Roscoe, your original question was around, why do I talk to people who aren't Christians necessarily? Well, it's because in the end, those things in my life that God has given us, we need to return in kind. And so I don't know any other way to be.
Thank you, Eric, for sharing that. I will say that I am preaching this coming Sunday, and my sermon is principally around the Good Samaritan. And those people who know that story, it's all about a person who recognized someone in need and went out of their way to help them.
Yeah.
And this person who helped this person wasn't supposed to, but he did it anyway.
Yeah,
Not only did he look out for them, that he made sure that after they had been put in a state where they could succeed, they could continue to be blessed. And so I understand exactly what you're saying. So thank you.
That sounds like a good sermon.
So thank you for doing what you do. I appreciate you. Thank you, Roscoe. What a great question. So can you share how you got started in the nonprofit?
Yeah, I was tricked. I really was, in a certain way. I mean, it took to me, but I really was. A friend of mine knew me and said, "Hey, we're starting this thing, and you should come and be a part of the first meeting." And I was like, "Oh, okay," and he has this idea, and he says, "What we should do is we should create a community center." And this is in, I don't know, probably 45 minutes from where I live. So the first meeting, he shows up and he's like, "I got this idea, and here's this other guy that I want to introduce you to, and his name is Lee. And Lee has this idea about what he wants to do with the community center in this birthday, which is not too far away." All of a sudden, that guy disappears. The guy who invited me to the meeting disappeared. Like, he left and never has come back. Years ago. I was like, "That's not fair." What does he do? Anyway, that was how it started. And then essentially it's a community center, and it focused on sometimes too many things. That's the frustrating things, is that there are actually too many needs.
Mm-hmm.
But to train people how to work, we have a coffee bar, and we'll teach them how to be a barista. We also have a place for a learning center, computers. We have a place for we lease it out to a church. We have a life coaching center, and so there's been a chaplain training program that has developed out of it called Grace Core, CORE, and that was a misspelling originally. It was supposed to be Core, CORPS, right? But it was misspelled, and so then they just decided, yeah, that makes sense. The core of everything is grace, and so they've begun training chaplains to help the community, and
Wow.
And so we've got chaplains who spread into the community. We have chaplains who have taken on a chaplaincy to, when the police go out and there's been a death, a shooting or a traumatic event, they call these chaplains, and they're called support officers. And those chaplains are the ones that deliver the news often, and they're the ones that comfort the grieving. And they get called out 50 times a month.
50 times a month. Wow.
50 times. I think that's grace that I've never, I've not been given that ability to deal with the amount of tragedy that much, but that's what our chaplains have been doing. And we've actually, that came full circle to me because in our community, a woman, she took her own life and her children. And it was someone that my wife knew well enough. And it was really, really heartbreaking and traumatic. And one of those chaplains who we had trained in this organization, she was one of the ones who talked to us. And it was just like, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. It's like, wait a minute. So the people that were there to support us now were people that we had seeded into, 4 years prior. And that's the nonprofit. So it's this weird amalgam of community need. Oh, and by the way, I should mention a big chunk of what we did during the pandemic. And I should say, there's a whole group of people. It's not, it really, I'm kind of a bystander in that way, but we delivered fresh foods, as many as we could, to as many families as possible. I think we had at our peak, we had 90 families that were getting regular food. I don't know how many, several hundred people that were part of that. And so as the food came in the door, it'd get packaged up and sent out, because it was fresh, so it would spoil, it'd perish otherwise. And we're still doing that now. In fact, that's a big chunk of how we help people.
That is totally amazing. So can you share the website to the nonprofit?
Sure. It's called thebridgehope.com. Thebridgehope.com. And so the name of the organization is the Bridge Community Hope Center. And the model is to create a community center that helps people, with life. It's not, it's not exactly, it's not for homeless exactly, right? I mean, although we actually have a group that's kind of coming out of the bridge that will help that. It's really for what we call the working poor, right? The people who struggle to make ends meet and need clothes. So we have a clothing boutique, which, allows us to train people how to take money and work a cash register. We have a coffee bar, which teaches people how to become baristas. And we run people through training programs. It's really cool. And the coffee's pretty good.
This sounds amazing. And I encourage those who are listening through streaming and on the radio to reach out to your organization. Share it one more time.
It's thebridgehope.com.
Thank you, Eric, for sharing that. Let's talk about your career in technology. So how long have you been doing technology?
1985, I got my first computer. I don't know how old I was, pretty young. The technology career, though, started, I would say, in 2000, where probably a little before that, I was doing a number of things that required web design, graphic design. I wasn't a graphic designer. I just used Photoshop and Illustrator and PageMaker. And I was hired to do some of that stuff for a little political campaign. And we produced these little newspapers, and I had to learn how newspapers were printed. How do you even do that? It's crazy. Now it doesn't even matter. There aren't any newspapers, right? But I had to understand how to do websites. I built websites from scratch using PHP, and I had a little business doing that for a number of years, about 5 years, and then I went to work for T-Mobile, and I started in the call center. I kind of started over a little bit. I started in the call center, and I worked my way up as fast as I could into a position. Well, T-Mobile is a technology company, right? Wireless services at the time, tiny in comparison to what they are now. Now they're a monster, bigger than Verizon's market cap, but at the time we weren't even close. And I spent 5 years developing business sense and helping to create a number of different kind of really cool things that in the company, including selling to the federal government. And I lived in Washington, D.C. for 5 years while we built that. And then after T-Mobile, I've worked in IT organizations. And right now I work for a fiber company in the Northwest, so Pacific Northwest. And what we do is we're community based. So we're actually based out of Kirkland, which is kind of right outside of Seattle. And we are building fiber to rural communities. I would say that's probably, we don't have a lot of big city infrastructure. It's mostly rural. And so it is a lot of community engagement. And that's big. That's a really big, it's up and coming. It's where all the money's being spent, on a national level. And we're really transforming things. But I like the feel of the local company. I like that we're connected to the community. Like, we live in the communities that we work with. So I work as an account director, they call it, for some larger companies and counties that would need business class services, dedicated fiber and point-to-point services and all sorts of techie, nerdy stuff. I'd say half my job now is probably construction, and instead of technology, trying to figure out how to get fiber in the door.
Ike Potter's back again from Germany. Does your participation in office hours community has changed your view or behavior or goals?
It most certainly has. I started out, I was using this little microphone, What- I mean, I've been doing video and audio meetings for a decade, right? But it's usually a phone. You use a phone. And moving to a microphone was a different idea. But I did that before office hours, mostly because I felt like, this doesn't sound great, and I wanted to use my iPad for everything. In 2018, I was really, really into like moving away from using a laptop and just using something simple. And so I actually moved in the direction of an iPad, and I thought, oh, the iPad audio is not great. Maybe I would get something a little better. And I got this microphone, and that kind of sent me down the rabbit hole. So as soon as the pandemic rolled around, I was watching Mac Break Weekly, probably like most people, watching Mac Break Weekly, and Alex Lindsay is talking about office hours, and it's this interesting community. And so I went and I just lurked in, and I was like, oh, they're suggesting that thing. Oh, I should try that. Well, this last year I went whole hog, and I got into the office hours family of that I would say it truly is a remarkable group, being that it is everywhere in the world, and yet we all share similar problems, and we all have these experiences that are really helpful to other people in the world. And so I went crazy, and I've got 2 Stream Decks, and I've got an interface that I got from one of the office hours members. Don't buy used gear generally, but this one's pretty good. An A10 Mini Extreme. I don't know what I would do with that long term. Monitors all over, lights. I don't know. It's amazingly fun. But what I'll say, office out, we're missing out if it's just for media professionals, because there's so many people who need that kind of relationship. Zoom can be tiring, and it was, until I realized that if you do it right, you can spend hours doing it, and it doesn't feel like a drag. It doesn't feel like you're just gonna go to sleep. If you do it right, it's uplifting. And that's where I think office hours really can have an impact on the community at large, right? It's not just a bunch of production folks. It's people who can make your experience feel amazing. And and that's the goal, right? It's creating a production like this and making it feel amazing. So I spent all day, at the computer. We use Teams at work, not Zoom. But it's the same thing, right? And if you can create an experience that feels good, one, you stand out, and two, you can communicate better. I don't have to get on a plane. I don't have to drive 2 hours. I can have a really great conversation that people learn from and are engaged by, hopefully. And I can do that because of what I've gotten out of the community.
When you're in your work meetings, how do you look compared to everybody else?
Well, I mean, other than my face, I think really good. Like if it was somebody else sitting here, it'd be perfect. No, I'm joking. Usually it's people sitting against a window. You're like, you see an outline of their face, and then a bright sunlit, background, or I always enjoy the cutouts around their head. Where it's like they have a blue background, but it's just like sitting on top of their head. Yeah, I actually inspired a guy to get a background. I just got a blue screen behind me and just kind of threw it up behind me. I think it looks pretty good as far as, the color contrast.
It looks great.
But he went and got one, and it completely, like, he still uses the camera on his laptop, but it definitely changes things. So, there's some people that get inspired by it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I will say this. We're going to move on, but I will say that it's important for those people who are listening that you understand that good audio and good video makes the experience, the interaction much better. And so to piggyback on some of the things that you said earlier, if you are interested in being a house of worship that wants to have streaming um, participation, good audio, good video. If you're a person that wants to increase your sales, if you have any type of business at all, you want to focus on good audio and good video. And then there is not any issue with anything like Zoom fatigue because your good audio and your good video is speaking to those people. A lot of times people don't understand that when there's not good audio and not good video, it's taxing on the mind. And that's why you have Zoom fatigue.
Right.
So we're running out of time. So we want to try to get to all the answers to the questions that we have. The next question, again, is from Roscoe Jones. And Roscoe says, can you talk about volunteers and how to support them? Have you found any keys to what makes a good volunteer or how to develop them?
I found volunteers do things for their own reasons. In a business, it's easier to determine the reasons. It's usually they're getting paid, right? A volunteer isn't getting paid, typically. Some volunteer firefighters maybe, but typically volunteers don't get paid. So they're doing it for other reasons, right? They're doing it because they're getting something personally from it. They're getting, they're seeing an outcome that they want to have in their community, or that's what you have to determine, I think, in a volunteer organization is why are these people choosing to be here? Why are they volunteering? What are they trying to get out of it? Right? Are they trying to get a community out of it? Are they trying to get some, notoriety out of it? Are they trying to get relationships from it? Those are all legitimate things that volunteers look for. And we've had volunteers come and go. And it's hard because sometimes you can't replace what some of them are doing. But I think what makes a really great volunteer is just a desire to help in any way that's needed. If you come in and you say, the only thing I want to do is this one thing, and that's all I'm going to do. That's a hard volunteer to work with. I mean, I will, but it's a lot harder to do. And so what makes you a good volunteer is to say, where do you need me? And if the organization says, come over here and stick your finger in this dike and stop the water from flooding us, do that. Don't think, well, that's beneath me. It's kind of, I got more skills than that. That's the hard part, is that some of these nonprofits are very strapped for funds and need a lot of care. And so be a good volunteer and just put yourself at their discretion, say, where can you use me? And then you'll find your needs are met. That's typically what I found.
Thank you, Eric. We're in our lightning round. And for some reason, the questions seem like they're getting longer.
I know, right?
And Dr. Chris Clark is here, and he is Dr. Chris Clark from Tempe, Arizona. A frequent topic of office hour concerns audio quality in live streaming. Do you see a resemblance between tech solutions for signal to noise ratio programs and your work, helping people in distress to reduce noise and hear noise and to still small voice?
I think I understand the nature of the question. I would say people need to hear you to be helped, right? Just like on a Zoom call, it's really fatiguing if it's hard to hear you. I think when you're trying to help someone, there's got to be a willingness to listen. But there also has to be, from the person who's trying to help, there has to be an understanding that They may not know what you're saying. They may not know that you're trying to help. And the only way you can communicate to them is on their level. Honestly, it's the hardest thing I found as being a father is communicating to my children at a level that they get. Right. And so sometimes that means you have to get down and match their eye level and look at them in the eyes and speak to them directly. And sometimes it means taking your explanations and reducing the complexity. And sometimes it means just giving them what you know is good for them, whether they like it or not. But either way, they have to understand. There has to be communication, right? There has to be, and I think that's what it feels like with the question is that it's about what you can do to communicate what's important, what you think is important to the person you're trying to help.
Thank you, Eric, for that. And so we're getting down to the end. You're speaking to the world. What do you want them to know?
The people around us are the most important in your life. And so making an impact, making a difference for them is more important than looking further away or further out to those people down the way that you think you can help. Take a moment and look around at the people that you can affect in your circle. And when you're done with that, then move on.
All right. Thank you, Eric, for that. And I think that might be our last question. And it is our last question. So, wow. Do we have any more questions? I'm asking my team in the background. Or do we have any more questions? And I'm not getting a response. So I'm going to say that. All right. So, all right. Thank you so much. So here we are. Hold on one second. I'm sorry. So we want to say thank you, Kimberly Mobley, Ron Mobley, Global Family and Friends, Alex Lindsay, DVE Store, Luna Entertainment Technologies, Byte Hive, Video360.com, ApproveLoan.com, Cloud Bedrock, Ken Jordan, Jonas Tatel, Aaron Hustler, Jared Cheetah, David Brady, Mark Sleefolk, Richard Lavery, Chris Fenwick, Manolo Lozano, Chris Fenwick, Manolo Lozano, Jeffrey Powers, Bo Cordell, Mickey McAchore, Hasmuk Gajar, Doug Moeller, Laura Thompson, Brian Chan, Dennis Champion Walker, Roscoe Jones, George Butters, Joshua Menden, Daniel Maxwell, Taylor Sunderhouse, Adrian Allback, Michael Marr, Zachary Sorensen, Conversation with Tony Mobley, producer, Klylok Miguel Lopez Waterman. And if you have an opportunity, please go and look back at our 60 plus episodes of Conversations with Tony Mobley. I want to thank everyone so much for being here. We hope that this conversation is helpful, and we hope that you enjoyed this experience. Thank you, Z98.1FM.com, our audience in Cincinnati. Thank you, LinkedIn Live. Thank you, YouTube. Look for us on your favorite streaming platforms going forward. Thank you, Eric. for this great conversation. Thank you for doing the work that you do. Conversation with Tony Mobley. Guest next week is Mr. Aaron Husledge. And you want to find out who Aaron Husledge is. And I guarantee you, if you come next week to participate in this conversation, you will not be disappointed. And you are more than welcome to go to our YouTube chat, our YouTube presence, and like and subscribe. Thank you all so much. Thank you again, Eric, so much for being with me today. Appreciate you being here, my friend, and looking forward to having more conversations with you in the future. Take care. Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.